Good evening and welcome to Spaceflight Now's live coverage of the launch of a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket with 49 Starlink internet satellites this evening from NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. You're looking at a live view of SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket out on pad 39A this evening under a pinkish sky as the sun is setting here on Florida's Space Coast. SpaceX is now T minus 1 hour, 13 minutes, and 30 seconds from liftoff this evening of the Falcon 9. Launch is scheduled for 7:04 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 0004 GMT or UTC. Again, this mission is carrying the next batch of 49 Starlink internet satellites into orbit. It's a gorgeous evening for a launch this evening with clear skies over the Space Coast, light winds this evening, and it's a relatively chilly evening by Florida standards, with temperatures hovering around 60 degrees Fahrenheit at this hour. Those temperatures will dip a little bit as we head toward launch time of 7:04 p.m. Eastern Time this evening. You can see in this view the flagpole at the press site at Kennedy Space Center. The flag is blowing in some light winds. The weather forecast issued by the 45th Weather Squadron earlier today showed a greater than 95% chance of good weather for launch this evening. That's a really good forecast. That's rare to see such a highly optimistic forecast from the weather forecast team here at Cape Canaveral. However, the conditions are nearly ideal for a liftoff, and there's also just a very low risk of any conditions in the upper atmosphere with upper level winds or seas and winds downrange in the booster recovery zone factoring into tonight's mission. So all in all, a great night for a launch. The launch was originally scheduled for yesterday evening. SpaceX decided to call that off in the afternoon yesterday, a few hours before the launch time, because the weather, particularly downrange at the booster landing zone in the Atlantic Ocean, southeast of the Space Coast, didn't look so great yesterday with some winds and high seas out there where the drone ship is holding position roughly 400 miles downrange. However, those conditions tonight are much improved. Weather along the Space Coast at pad 39A looks good this evening. So SpaceX is pressing on for launch now an hour and 11 minutes from now at 7:04 p.m. and 30 seconds Eastern Standard Time, or 12:04 a.m. UTC. Tonight's launch of the Falcon 9 rocket from Kennedy Space Center will mark SpaceX's third Falcon 9 mission of the year. It'll be the third mission in just 18 days by SpaceX, actually, the third mission in just 12 days, because SpaceX kicked off the year with the launch of 49, the 49 previous Starlink satellites back on January 6th from this very same launch facility at Kennedy Space Center. That mission was successful and followed on January 13th by the launch of the subsequent Falcon 9 mission from neighboring Pad 40 down at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station a few miles away. That mission on the 13th, or last Thursday, launched 105 small satellites for a variety of commercial and government and university customers. These 105 small satellites ranged in size from roughly the size of a soda can up to the dimensions of a household washing machine. And these satellites came from customers in around 20 different countries around the world. This was SpaceX's third transporter rideshare mission, a new class of mission that SpaceX has arranged to cluster large numbers of small satellites from a variety of customers onto a single rocket, thereby diminishing the price of a launch for small businesses and small satellite operators. With tonight's mission, the attention turns back to SpaceX's Starlink network, which has been responsible for the lion's share of SpaceX's Falcon 9 missions over the last couple of years. More than half of SpaceX's missions since mid 2019 have been dedicated to the Starlink network. Launch now about an hour and 4 minutes and 30 seconds away, approaching the 6 p.m. hour here on the east coast of the United States. The sun is down. It has slipped below the western horizon. You're looking at a live view of the Falcon 9 on pad 39A, looking out toward the east, toward the Atlantic Ocean from the Kennedy Space Center, as SpaceX is just now a little over an hour away from launch this evening. Again, weather conditions look ideal. We're not aware of any technical concerns at this hour. We'll be standing by for the first official update from SpaceX on the progress of the countdown, coming up in less than 30 minutes from now with the start of propellant loading. That'll be a key milestone. There'll be a poll of the SpaceX launch team leading up to that moment when we'll hear whether all parameters are indeed go for launch this evening. Again, liftoff targeted for 7:04 and 30 seconds p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 12:04 a.m. UTC. Welcome back to our live coverage. The countdown for tonight's Falcon 9 launch has just passed the T-minus 60-minute point. Everything appears to be on schedule this evening for liftoff at 7:04 and 30 seconds p.m. Eastern Time, or 12:04 a.m. UTC. This mission will be carrying up 49 Starlink internet satellites. Those satellites are stacked inside the payload fairing of the Falcon 9 rocket, which you see in this view on top of the 23-story tall booster out at pad 39A. These satellites are stacked inside the payload fairing. Here's a representative photo from a previous mission of the satellites mounted onto a payload adapter, prepared for encapsulation inside the payload shroud of the Falcon 9 rocket. In this view, again, from a previous mission, you see one half of that payload fairing prepared to encapsulate the stack of Starlink satellites. With this launch, SpaceX will have launched more than 2,000 Starlink satellites with this mission. The current tally is 1,993. So with these 49 new satellites, the total tally of SpaceX Starlink satellites that have been launched will reach 2,043 spacecraft. These satellites are flat packed again into a neat, tight stack on top of the Falcon 9. Each spacecraft weighs about a quarter ton. Once they separate all at once from the Falcon 9 rocket, around 15 minutes after liftoff this evening, the spacecraft will each unfurl a solar panel to begin generating power from solar energy. And that power will feed the electronics and communications instruments on board each spacecraft, and also power the ion propulsion system, which will be used to guide the spacecraft from their deployment orbit around 100 to 200 miles above Earth up to an operational altitude at 335 miles or 540 kilometers. Tonight's mission is targeting an orbit inclined 53.2 degrees to the equator. This is one of 5 different orbital shells that SpaceX is populating with Starlink satellites. Eventually, the network will total around 4,400 Starlink satellites, at least in the first phase of deployment. SpaceX has plans to launch thousands more in a future follow-on constellation if the market demands it. SpaceX builds these satellites in Redmond, Washington, on an assembly line. They are built at a pace to accommodate around up to a launch every 2 weeks or so, meaning SpaceX churns out on average between 100 and 200, if you do the math, 100 and 200 satellites per month. At last report, SpaceX's Starlink internet network is serving more than 100,000 customers in more than 20 countries around the world. The customers use a flat array antenna, to connect with the internet network. As the satellites pass overhead, the antenna is fixed and can receive internet signals from the Starlink satellites as they fly in orbit between 335 and 350 miles above Earth. Just passing the T-minus 56-minute mark in the countdown. Again, you're looking back at a live view of Kennedy Space Center, pad 39A, the historic launch complex out on the Atlantic Ocean coast, where the Falcon 9 rocket is awaiting liftoff this evening at 7:04 p.m. Eastern Time, or 12:04 UTC, with SpaceX's Starlink 4-6 mission. That's the designation for tonight's flight, carrying 49 individual spacecraft into orbit. In this view of the Falcon 9 out on pad 39A, you're looking at the launch vehicle, which stands 229 feet or 70 meters tall. That rocket consists of the payload fairing, which you see is the nose cone bulbous shaped structure on top of the vehicle. That's where those 49 Starlink satellites are stacked inside, buttoned up for liftoff this evening. Below that, the white cylinder structure is the second stage of the Falcon 9 rocket. That's the only part of the vehicle that is brand new, fresh from SpaceX's factory out in Hawthorne, California. The payload fairing, the two halves of that structure are each veterans of a single previous mission. And the first stage booster is a veteran of 9 previous missions. You can see the markings on the vehicle there, the gray dark markings of soot from the exhaust from its 9 previous flights to space. On the right side of the rocket in this view is the strongback structure, also the transporter erector arm that carries the Falcon 9 launch vehicle from its hangar at the southern perimeter of pad 39A up the ramp to the launch pad, and then lifts it vertical hydraulically in preparation for a launch countdown. On the left side of the Falcon 9, the black structure standing next to the Falcon 9 is the fixed tower at pad 39A. This is the same structure that stood in this position in the space shuttle program, this pad formerly being used for NASA space shuttle launches, as well as the Apollo Saturn V moon missions, including the launch of Apollo 11 back in 1969. Near the top of pad 39A's fixed tower, on the right side of the structure, sticking out toward the payload fairing of the Falcon 9 is the crew access arm. This is the arm on which the astronauts who fly on SpaceX's Crew Dragon space missions board the capsule during the final few hours before liftoff. And then on the left of the fixed tower is the water tower that contains the water that is dumped all around and all along the pad deck in the final few seconds of the launch to suppress the sound and acoustic energy generated from ignition of the Falcon 9's Merlin main engines. As I mentioned, the first stage on this mission is booster number 1060 in SpaceX's fleet. It's a Block 5 Falcon 9 booster first stage, which is the latest version of the Falcon 9 booster design. It debuted back in June 2020 with the launch of a US military GPS navigation satellite. Since then, it has launched on 5 different Starlink missions in September 2020, October 2020, March 2021, April 2021, and most recently, December 2nd, 2021. And it's also launched on 2 commercial missions, one with Turksat 5A, a Turkish communications satellite a year ago this month, as well as the Transporter 2 rideshare mission back on June 30th, 2021. So this booster is one of the most flown in SpaceX's inventory. And with tonight's mission, it'll put a 10th mission on its record. And it'll be the 4th booster in SpaceX's fleet to achieve a 10 mission milestone. The SpaceX countdown is now passing T-minus 48 minutes. As you can see, winds are fairly calm at the Kennedy Space Center. Skies are clear. Everything weather-wise looks fantastic for a launch this evening from pad 39A. Liftoff again timed for 7:04 and 30 seconds p.m. Eastern Time, or 12:04 UTC. The Falcon 9 launch countdown has just passed the T-minus 45-minute mark. We're now less than 10 minutes away from the anticipated start of propellant loading into the Falcon 9 rocket. At this time, SpaceX's launch team inside the firing room at the Launch Control Center at Kennedy Space Center should be being polled for their concurrence and approval to start this process of propellant loading, which will lead up to a liftoff at 7:04 p.m. Eastern Time this evening. This poll is conducted electronically, so members of the SpaceX team overseeing various elements of the Falcon 9 rocket, the Starlink payload, as well as ground systems at Complex 39A will give their status, either go or no go, in preparation for a final go from SpaceX's launch conductor for the start of propellant load. That propellant loading process begins at T-minus 35 minutes. During that propellant loading, SpaceX will pump RP1, which is a highly refined kerosene fuel, into both stages of the Falcon 9. SpaceX will load around 46,000 gallons of this fuel into the rocket. In parallel with that, liquid oxygen, chilled to near its freezing point, several hundred degrees below zero, will also be flowing into the Falcon 9. This liquid oxygen, as its name might suggest, is an oxidizer that the Merlin engines will consume in mixture with the RP1 kerosene fuel. So those propellants will be flowed into the turbopumps of the 9 Merlin engines at the base of the first stage, as well as the single vacuum optimized Merlin engine on stage 2. And those engines will consume those propellants during their burns to get out of the atmosphere and to maneuver into orbit with these 49 new Starlink internet satellites. Stage 1 will also keep a small reserve of the propellant on board after its ascent burn is complete. And those remaining propellant volumes will be consumed during descent, during an entry burn, and then a final landing burn to bring the first stage back to SpaceX's drone ship. Of course, a shortfall of gravitas, rather, in the Atlantic Ocean downrange. SpaceX's countdown now passing the T-minus 40-minute mark, 40 minutes until liftoff of the Falcon 9 from pad 39A. For those of you keeping track of precise launch times, tonight's liftoff is set for precisely 7:04 and 30 seconds p.m. Eastern Time. That's 12:04 and 30 seconds UTC AM UTC. So 30 seconds after the 7:04 p.m. minute here on the Florida East Coast. The SpaceX countdown has just passed T minus 35 minutes. This is the anticipated start of propellant loading. However, at this time, we're not getting any feed from the Launch Control Center from SpaceX as they typically provide uh, during their countdowns. So we'll stand by for obtaining that audio feed to give you an update on the countdown, or we'll watch for signs of vapors beginning to appear around the Falcon 9 booster and strongback in the next few minutes to verify that fueling and propellant loading has started. So as the countdown, we believe, approaches 29 minutes until the scheduled liftoff time this evening, that time scheduled for 7:04 p.m. Eastern time. We're not getting any updates at this point from SpaceX. They are mum on the progress of the countdown, and we're also not seeing any obvious signs of vapors venting around the Falcon 9 booster. We would normally see that beginning around this time. Uh, if a propellant loading was underway, those venting of gaseous oxygen vapors bowling off during that propellant loading process. So we'll stand by, and if we see any signs of propellant loading, we'll let you know in this live view. And we'll let you know if we hear anything from SpaceX on the status of tonight's launch attempt. As we wait for an update from SpaceX on tonight's Starlink mission from Kennedy Space Center, we'll show you a graphic of the rocket's planned trajectory. When the Falcon 9 lifts off, it will head southeast out over the Atlantic Ocean, heading downrange. This launch will be the second Starlink mission to use this new trajectory toward the southeast. Previous Starlink flights headed northeast out over the Atlantic Ocean. SpaceX started using this new southeasterly trajectory earlier this month with the previous Starlink flight. That allows the drone ship or landing platform where the booster will land and return to Earth to be positioned northeast of the Bahamas, where winds and waves are generally more favorable for a recovery of the booster during the winter months. So as you can see, this red graphic here shows the rocket's first stage trajectory to the southeast from Kennedy Space Center. And then the green line shows the dogleg maneuver that will be performed with stage 2. After stage separation, second stage will make a slight right turn to fly just north of the Abacos Islands, and then fly northeast of the Bahamas, remaining just out over the water, just off the coast of the Bahamas as it heads downrange. As we await an update from SpaceX on tonight's launch attempt, you're looking at a live view of the moonrise just to the right or south from Pad 39A. This view coming from the press site at Kennedy Space Center. The nearly full moon rising over the horizon, reflected in the tidal turn basin at the press site. Again, winds calm this evening, weather ideal for launch. However, it appears that the launch is not likely happening as scheduled at 7:04 p.m. Eastern Time. SpaceX does have a backup opportunity for launch this evening later on at 9:02 p.m., or SpaceX could elect to delay the mission till tomorrow when there's another launch opportunity available around 6:42 p.m. Eastern Time. But at this point, it's apparent that SpaceX is not loading propellants into the Falcon 9 rocket, and all signs point to liftoff not occurring at 7:04 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll stand by for an update on the schedule for when SpaceX might be able to launch the mission, be it later this evening or tomorrow. Once again, a gorgeous evening apparent at Kennedy Space Center with the full moon rising over the eastern horizon about 15 minutes ago. Skies are clear, winds are calm. The official weather forecast showed a very low risk of any upper level wind issues or recovery weather issues downrange at the location of the SpaceX drone ship in the Atlantic Ocean. So we're waiting on word from SpaceX on when the Falcon 9 will be able to take flight. Launch clearly not occurring at 7:04 p.m. Eastern Time this evening. Propellant loading did not begin. There's been no update from SpaceX, a lack of any official news on the status of the launch countdown from SpaceX this time. However, we know that they do have a backup opportunity later tonight at 9:02 p.m. Eastern Time or 0202 UTC, as well as a pair of opportunities tomorrow evening, Wednesday night, if needed. And we just learned from SpaceX via Twitter that the new T0 or launch time for this evening is scheduled for 9:02 p.m. Eastern Time, 0202 UTC. SpaceX finally providing an update just 14 minutes prior to the original launch time, although it's been obvious for some time that liftoff was not occurring at 7:04 p.m. Again, launch now targeted for 9:02 p.m. Eastern Time, 0202 UTC, or about 2 hours, 11 minutes from now. So stick with us. We'll continue our live stream of the launch pad at Kennedy Space Center, where the Falcon 9 remains vertical for liftoff with 49 Starlink satellites, a little later than advertised this evening. So we'll have live coverage resuming shortly. In the meantime, enjoy live views of the launch complex and the Falcon 9 as the nearly full moon climbs higher in the sky this evening on Florida's Space Coast. We're now about 2 hours from SpaceX's next launch opportunity this evening. That launch opportunity scheduled for 9:02 p.m. Eastern Time, 0202 UTC. Again, SpaceX is bypassing the original launch opportunity at 7:04 p.m. or 12:04 a.m. UTC. SpaceX confirmed that a few minutes ago on Twitter. Again, no explanation provided for the reason for the 2-hour delay in tonight's launch. Weather conditions, at least at Kennedy Space Center, appear to be ideal for a launch. Calm winds, clear skies, and no apparent issues with upper level winds. And the forecast downrange where SpaceX's drone ship is located for landing of the first stage, at that location, the forecast, at least earlier today, indicated just a low risk of any issues with winds or waves that could pose a hazard for that landing of the first stage booster. So we're not sure of the reason for the 2-hour delay this evening. However, SpaceX has confirmed that 9:02 p.m. Eastern Standard Time or 2:02 a.m. UTC is the new target launch time for tonight's launch, which is designated as Starlink 4-6. This mission, again, carrying 49 Starlink satellites into orbit, joining SpaceX's global internet network. We'll have further updates with you down the line this evening as we count down to the next launch opportunity, a little less than 2 hours from now. So stand by with us. Enjoy our live views from Kennedy Space Center showing the gorgeous full moon now rising, climbing higher in the sky as the American flag waves at the press site at Kennedy Space Center, and the Falcon 9 stands there 3 miles away, 229 feet tall, 70 meters tall, now less than 2 hours from launch with 49 Starlink internet satellites.
Good evening again. This is Stephen Clark from Spaceflight Now, providing live launch coverage. We're looking at a live view of the Falcon 9 rocket on pad 39A this evening. SpaceX is now targeting 9:02 p.m. Eastern Time or 2:02 a.m. UTC for liftoff. This mission set to carry 49 new Starlink satellites into orbit to join SpaceX's global high-speed, low-latency internet network. The launch was previously supposed to happen at 7:04 p.m. Eastern Time. However, SpaceX, shortly before 7 p.m., confirmed that the launch would be delayed nearly 2 hours, now targeting the backup instantaneous opportunity tonight. That opportunity, again, timed for exactly 9:02 and 40 seconds p.m. Eastern Standard Time or 2:02 and 40 seconds a.m. UTC. And with that new launch time of 9:02 p.m. Eastern Time, SpaceX is expected to begin loading propellants into the Falcon 9 rocket at around 8:27 p.m. Eastern Time. This will involve loading kerosene and liquid oxygen into both stages of the rocket, setting the stage for liftoff at 9:02 p.m. and 40 seconds. It continues to be a pleasant evening at Kennedy Space Center with clear skies, with a full moon now hanging over the launch pad in the eastern sky. Winds are light at this hour. All weather conditions continue to look favorable for liftoff this evening. SpaceX hasn't said the reason for delaying the mission tonight from 7:04 p.m. to 9:02 p.m. As you can see in this view of the flag at Kennedy Space Center press site, the winds have picked up a bit from earlier in the evening. However, winds are continue to be well under any constraint for launch tonight. Gorgeous view of the nearly full moon continuing to rise higher in the sky over the Space Coast at this hour. Beautiful views of the moon now over the spaceport. This mission launching from pad 39A, the same launch complex where Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Mike Collins lifted off back in July 1969 on that first lunar landing mission, the Apollo 11 mission. Tonight's launch will actually be the 137th launch to take off from pad 39A since the launch complex was constructed back in the space race in the 1960s. The launch pad supported all but one of NASA's Saturn V rocket launches back in the late 60s and early 70s. It also supported the Space Shuttle program. The first and last Space Shuttle missions launched from this launch complex. And then the launch pad sat dormant for around 6 years, or nearly 6 years, until SpaceX began launching Falcon 9 rockets from Pad 39A. That first SpaceX mission from this pad lifted off back on February 19th, 2017 on a cargo mission to the International Space Station. And including that mission, tonight's launch will be the 43rd SpaceX flight to take off from Pad 39A. SpaceX's launches from this pad have extended the historic legacy of 39A, including the first Falcon Heavy launch, SpaceX's heavy lift rocket made by combining 3 Falcon 9 rocket cores together, currently the most powerful operational rocket in the world. SpaceX also launches crew missions from this pad, and the Crew Dragon spacecraft launched with astronauts for the first time from this pad back on May 30th, 2020, carrying Doug Hurley and Bob Behnken to the International Space Station. That launch ended a gap of nearly 9 years in U.S. orbital human spaceflight capability that ended with the last space shuttle launch, also from this same launch pad, back in July 2011. So an historic legacy at 39A. Tonight's mission, again, will be the 137th rocket to take off from this launch site. The SpaceX countdown now at T-minus 1 hour, 5 minutes, and 30 seconds. A few moments ago, if you're watching our live view of the launch pad, some of the lighting out at the launch pad was just turned up to a brighter setting, indicating that SpaceX may be on the verge of entering the final countdown procedures. SpaceX's launch team is controlling the countdown from Firing Room 4 at the Launch Control Center, which is located in the shadow of the Vehicle Assembly Building at Kennedy Space Center. This Launch Control Center has 4 is built with 4 firing rooms. Was originally constructed for the Apollo program, and since then the firing rooms were converted for use for the space shuttle, as well as for the Space Launch System. And one of the firing rooms has been handed over to SpaceX to manage and operate their Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy countdowns out of there.
The Falcon 9 countdown just passed the T-minus 1 hour and 4 minute mark. So now less than 30 minutes from when we should see the start of propellant loading. And in this view of the launch pad, you can now see some vapors venting away from some of the ground support equipment, from some of the ground storage tanks and transfer lines. These vapors, we believe, are gaseous oxygen associated with the liquid oxygen loading system at 39A. At this point in the countdown, SpaceX should be beginning some procedures to condition and prep those systems for propellant loading. That will involve a chill down of some of the ground storage tanks and transfer lines that lead to the base of the transporter erector strong back, where the fluids will begin flowing into the first stage. T-minus 1 hour and counting. We're an hour away from tonight's second instantaneous launch opportunity. For those of you keeping track of precise launch times, T0 tonight is now set for 9:02 and 40 seconds p.m. Eastern Time. That's 2:02 and 40 seconds a.m. UTC. Now around 59 and a half minutes away. You're looking at a live view of Launchpad 39A, where the Falcon 9 rocket stands 229 feet or 70 meters tall. At the top of the rocket there, you see the cone-shaped nose shroud, the payload fairing there. Inside that payload fairing are 49 Starlink satellites. These 49 satellites are on their way to join SpaceX's constellation of broadband relay stations providing worldwide internet coverage. This view shows a stack of Starlink satellites before a previous mission, representative of the payload stack inside the Falcon 9 rocket for launch tonight. And this view, again, from a previous mission, the Starlink satellites are stacked on top of a payload adapter fitting that then is mounted on stage 2 of the Falcon 9 rocket. And in this view, one half of the Falcon 9's payload shroud is seen being moved into position for encapsulation. And if you notice on that payload fairing, you can see some tank-like structures, some reservoirs there just to the right of the top of the Starlink stack. Those are associated with the recovery system for the payload fairing. And tonight's mission is flying a payload fairing with 2 clamshell halves, each of which has flown and been recovered from a prior Starlink flight. So again, 49 satellites on board tonight's mission. They're flat stacked, one on top of the other, held down by retention rods on each of the quadrants of the stack. Each satellite weighs about a quarter ton. And after they deploy from the top of the Falcon 9 upper stage, around 15 minutes after liftoff tonight, they will soon unfurl a solar panel. Each of the spacecraft will unfurl a solar array to begin charging its onboard batteries using solar energy. And that energy will power the spacecraft's electronics and communications equipment, and also feed power to its ion propulsion system, which uses a combination of electrical power and krypton, which is a noble gas on board, to create a low thrust from a plasma engine. This engine will be used to maneuver each spacecraft from its deployment orbit around 100 to 200 miles above Earth to an operational altitude of 335 miles or 540 kilometers at an inclination of 53.2 degrees to the equator. These satellites are built by SpaceX's Starlink team up in Redmond, Washington, on an assembly line where SpaceX's engineers churn out Starlink satellites at a rate of 1 to 200 per month, allowing the company to maintain its launch rate of a Starlink mission about every 2 weeks or so on average. So as of last report a couple of weeks ago, and this number likely has changed since then, SpaceX was serving more than 100,000 Starlink customers in more than 20 countries around the world, and adding new countries and new regions of service on a weekly basis. So Starlink users can sign up for the service, receive an antenna, a phased array antenna that receives Starlink internet signals from satellites as they pass overhead, and can use that connectivity to surf the internet and stay in communication with friends, coworkers, and family members. You're looking at a live view once again of Pad 39A, where the Falcon 9 is vertical at this hour. Launch remains scheduled for 9:02 and 40 seconds p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's 02:02 and 40 seconds UTC. Now about 55 minutes away. So the next major milestone we expect to hear in the countdown will be the start of propellant loading at T minus 35 minutes. Now, T-minus 47 minutes and counting. Once again, you're looking live at Launch Pad 39A at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida, where SpaceX has a Falcon 9 rocket standing vertical in preparation for liftoff this evening. You're seeing now a view of a security helicopter doing a sweep over the offshore waters over the Atlantic Ocean there, passing just behind the launch pad. This is part of a standard security sweep that the Coast Guard and Space Force do to ensure no aircraft and no maritime vessels, no boats, no ships are encroaching onto restricted waters near the Falcon 9 rocket or its downrange flight path. Now, 46 minutes until tonight's instantaneous launch opportunity at 9:02 p.m. Eastern Time. Pad 39A, you can see the Falcon 9 stands 229 feet or 70 meters tall. A few minutes ago, I showed you what it looks like inside the payload fairing on top of the rocket, where 49 satellites are mounted and buttoned up to join SpaceX's Starlink internet constellation. Below that, the white cylinder is the second stage of the Falcon 9 rocket. This is the only brand new element of the launch vehicle on tonight's mission, fresh from SpaceX's factory in Hawthorne, California. And below that, you see a black band. That's the interstage adapter structure. That's the area that connects the first stage with the second stage. And below that is the first stage booster, which itself stands around 15 stories tall. You can see the sooty markings, the gray, brown, blackish markings along the structure, the fuselage of the stage. You can see a faded American flag there just below the interstage area. This booster is designated B1060 in SpaceX's fleet and will be making its 10th trip to space tonight. This rocket debuted back in June of 2020. It was brand new for the launch of the U.S. Space Force's GPS 3-3 navigation satellite back on June 30th, 2020. Following that, it launched a pair of Starlink missions on September 3rd and October 24th, 2020. And then it launched the Turkish Turksat 5A communications satellite from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station on January 7th of 2021. Launched another Starlink mission on February 4th, 2021. And then two more Starlink missions in its record on March 24th and April 28th of 2021, followed by the launch of the Transporter 2 small satellite rideshare mission from Pad 40 at Cape Canaveral on June 30th of 2021. That was this rocket's 8th flight to space on the first anniversary of its debut, so 8 flights in a year. And then a bit of a longer wait for its most recent mission on December 2nd of last year, carrying a flock of Starlink internet satellites into orbit from Pad 40. Tonight's mission will be the 10th flight for Booster 1060. Each of these missions, the rocket was recovered after each of these missions. It was recovered on SpaceX's drone ships for all but one of the missions, Transporter 2 being the exception. On that mission, the booster returned to landing zone 1 at Cape Canaveral for an onshore landing. So tonight, SpaceX will go for the 10th flight for Booster 1060 and go for the 10th landing of the same booster in hopes of recovering it and reusing it again. Now T minus 40 minutes and counting. At this time, SpaceX is, as you see, the security helicopter now pass again behind Pad 39A at this time. SpaceX's launch team should be being polled at this time for a go for propellant load. SpaceX's engineers are located inside firing room 4 of the Launch Control Center, right next to the iconic vehicle assembly building at the Kennedy Space Center. This polling process is performed electronically. So SpaceX's engineers that oversee various elements of the Falcon 9 rocket, the Starlink satellites, ground systems will all indicate their readiness to proceed with the propellant load and terminal countdown this evening. And with that complete, SpaceX's launch conductor will voice their approval to begin propellant loading, and that propellant loading should begin at T minus 35 minutes. Now, T minus 37 minutes and 25 seconds. We're continuing to see some venting from the ground systems at Pad 39A, indicating that these systems are coming alive for a launch opportunity this evening. Liftoff set for precisely 9:02 and 40 seconds p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 2:02 a.m. UTC. Now, T minus 35 minutes at this point in the countdown, SpaceX should be kicking off the process to load propellants into the Falcon 9 rocket. However, again, as with the earlier launch opportunity, SpaceX is not providing any live updates on the status of the countdown. So we'll stand by for any updates from SpaceX on whether the propellant loading did indeed begin a few moments ago. And we can also watch out for indications of gaseous oxygen vapors venting away from the Falcon 9 and its strong back support structure. We do see some vapors streaming away from ground systems at the pad, so that's a good sign. However, no confirmation yet of the start of propellant loading into the launch vehicle. Now at T minus 28 minutes and 20 seconds, now clear signs from Launch Pad 39A that propellant loading is underway. We're seeing some of the frost buildup on the outer skin of the Falcon 9 rocket. This frost coming from the liquid oxygen tank at the inside the Falcon 9 booster structure, where oxidizer chilled to a few hundred degrees below zero is being loaded into the rocket at this time. Kerosene also being loaded into stage 1 at this hour, and kerosene fuel also flowing into the second stage. These 3 tanks are being loaded right now. The final tank to be filled during the countdown will be the liquid oxygen tank on the second stage. That is expected to begin at around T minus 16 minutes and 30 seconds, or around 11 minutes from now, will be that final stage of fueling or tanking of the Falcon 9 this evening. Also seeing some wisps of gaseous oxygen now emanating from the strongback. Clear signs that propellant loading has begun for a launch at 9:02 p.m. Eastern Time or 2:02 a.m. UTC. The winds have picked up over the last couple of hours since SpaceX scrubbed the initial launch attempt earlier this evening. However, weather appears to be still favorable for liftoff. Now T minus 26 minutes and 22 seconds. Tonight's launch will head southeast from Florida's Space Coast, southeast from Launch Complex 39A, targeting an orbit with an inclination of 53.2 degrees to the equator. This will be SpaceX's 35th Starlink mission to date. However, just the second to go toward the southeast from the Florida spaceport. SpaceX began flying this new trajectory, this new flight path, with a Starlink mission earlier this month. SpaceX says it will use this southeasterly trajectory during the winter months because of improved chances of favorable wind and sea conditions for the drone ship location out northeast of the Bahamas. Previous SpaceX Starlink missions headed on a trajectory toward the northeast, toward a similar orbital inclination out over the open ocean. This particular trajectory, as you can see, does fly relatively close to the Bahamas. This red line shows the flight path of stage 1, heading toward its landing on a shortfall of gravitas, SpaceX's drone ship on station around 400 miles or 650 kilometers southeast of Cape Canaveral. Around 2.5 minutes into the mission, the second stage will take over. The first stage will detach and begin its descent. And pretty much immediately after stage 2 ignites, it'll perform a slight right turn. It'll vector its thrust just a tad to fly what's called a dogleg maneuver. That trace is indicated by the green line. As the rocket heads downrange, it'll fly just veering to the right, or yawing to the right just a bit, to kind of hug the northern coast of the Abacos Islands of the Bahamas, and then flying northeast of Nassau, flying toward the Turks and Caicos Islands, and then eventually crossing the Dominican Republic and into the Caribbean Sea as it heads downrange, ultimately over the northeastern coast of South America, at which point the 49 Starlink satellites on the second stage will begin deploying at about T plus 15 minutes and 30 seconds. So now passing the 24-minute mark in the countdown, everything looks to be on schedule. As you can see now, a live view of Pad 39A, Falcon 9, becoming a little more frosty. Some of the ice is building up from that super cold liquid oxygen. This is as expected, indicating everything is going according to plan, proceeding apace for liftoff at 9:02 and 40 seconds p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Again, for those keeping track of times in UTC, that's 2:02 and 40 seconds a.m. UTC. Now 23 minutes and 20 seconds until liftoff. Now T-minus 22 minutes and counting. Tonight's launch will mark the 137th flight of a Falcon 9 rocket since the first version of the Falcon 9 debuted back in June of 2010. It'll be the 145th launch of a Falcon rocket from the whole Falcon rocket family since the very first Falcon 1 mission back in 2006. So that tally of 145 includes 137 Falcon 9s, 5 Falcon 1s, and 3 Falcon Heavy rockets. And as I mentioned earlier, it's the 10th flight of Falcon 9 booster tail number B1060, booster 1060, and it's the 137th launch from historic Pad 39A and the 43rd SpaceX mission to depart from that location. Overall, it's the 81st flight of a reused Falcon booster, and it's the 35th dedicated Falcon 9 launch to carry Starlink satellites into orbit. The first of those was back in May of 2019. And it's a busy January here on Florida's Space Coast. It's the third orbital launch overall based out of Cape Canaveral this year, all of which have been SpaceX Falcon 9 missions, 2 of those being Starlink flights, and then the most recent one being last Thursday, the 13th of January, SpaceX's Transporter 3 rideshare mission. Now at T-minus 20 minutes and 20 seconds, now you're seeing what's called the big vent. Typically occurs around 20 minutes before liftoff. This is an indication that the chill down of the strong back liquid oxygen loading lines for stage 2 has begun. At this point in the countdown, the RP1 kerosene fuel tank for stage 2 should be fully loaded. Meanwhile, kerosene and liquid oxygen should be continuing to flow into stage 1 now as the countdown passes the T-minus 20 minute point. Those 49 Starlink satellites tucked away inside the payload shroud at the very top of the Falcon 9 rocket. Everything looking good, everything looking just as expected at this point in the countdown as SpaceX prepares for liftoff of the Falcon 9 at 9:02 p.m. Eastern Time. Now passing the T-minus 15-minute point. At this time, liquid oxygen should be flowing into the second stage of the Falcon 9 rocket. However, SpaceX has not provided any updates on the status of the countdown since earlier stating that the launch had been postponed from 7:04 p.m. to 9:02 p.m. Eastern Time. However, visually, we can confirm that propellant loading started at T-minus 35 minutes, and that the strong back chill down occurred at T-minus 20 minutes, suggesting that liquid oxygen loading should have begun at T-minus 16 minutes and 30 seconds. Now T-minus 9 minutes and 30 seconds. The SpaceX countdown proceeding as planned at this time. Once again, tonight's mission carrying 49 Starlink internet satellites into orbit. The Falcon 9, after liftoff, will be powered by 9 Merlin 1D main engines, generating about 1.7 million pounds of thrust. Those engines will steer the Falcon 9 on a trajectory toward the southeast off of Florida's east coast, heading out over the Atlantic Ocean, targeting an orbit with an inclination of 53.2 degrees to the equator. SpaceX's drone ship, a shortfall of Gravitas, is on station around 400 miles or 650 kilometers downrange. That drone ship, about the size of a football field, will be the target for SpaceX's first stage booster. You see there on the view of pad 39A, that first stage booster stands about 15 stories tall. So it'll be targeting a landing on that drone ship about 8.5 minutes after liftoff. The red line on this map shows the expected flight path of the stage 1 booster. It'll reach beyond the von Karman line, flying above the edge of space, reaching a maximum altitude above 60 miles or above 100 kilometers. It'll shut down about 2.5 minutes after liftoff and begin that descent back toward the landing platform. Meanwhile, stage 2 will light its single Merlin engine. The stage 2 flight path is designated by the green trace on this map. Once that Merlin upper stage engine fires, it'll turn right. It'll vector its thrust to slightly make a right turn, flying just north of the Bahamas, flying east of Nassau. That right turn will actually line the Falcon 9's upper stage and its 49 Starlink satellites with the target orbit for tonight's mission. Again, that orbit inclined 53.2 degrees to the equator. That dogleg maneuver will be performed just to keep the Falcon 9's ground track just off the coast of the Bahamas to ensure it doesn't fly over any populated areas. Those 49 Starlink satellites are stacked, flat stacked inside the payload fairing of the Falcon 9 rocket. 49 Starlink satellites, each weighing about 1/4 ton. And again, those satellites destined for an orbit around 335 miles or 540 kilometers in altitude. Those satellites will actually be deployed or dropped off tonight in a slightly lower orbit, and will use ion propulsion to slowly, gradually maneuver into their operational altitude at 335 miles. Now, T-minus 6 minutes and 23 seconds. At T-minus 7 minutes, chill down of the Merlin main engines on the bottom of the first stage began. That process involves flowing small amounts of super cold propellant through some of the plumbing and through some of the components inside the turbo machinery of the Merlin engines. That chill down procedure essentially thermally conditions the engines for startup when they will begin receiving larger flows of super cold propellant. Engineers want to make sure that those components are thermally conditioned and in proper shape for prime time tonight when they fire and propel the Falcon 9 into the sky. Now passing the T-minus 4-minute mark, the Falcon 9 is now fully loaded with around 46,000 gallons of RP1, which is a highly refined kerosene fuel. This kerosene will feed the 9 Merlin engines on the first stage and single Merlin engine on the second stage for tonight's climb into orbit. At this point, the strong back structure on the right of the Falcon 9 in this view is being retracted. That is being retracted to an angle of about 1.2 to 1.5 degrees from the Falcon 9. This is the proper position it'll be in for engine ignition. And then as the Falcon 9 is released from its hold down clamps, the strong back will actually do a rapid retract to swing away and clear the flight path for the Falcon 9 to begin its ascent into the night sky this evening over Kennedy Space Center. T-minus 2 minutes and 40 seconds. T-minus 2 minutes and 17 seconds. The second stage is now full of liquid oxygen. Closeouts of liquid oxygen on the first stage should be confirmed momentarily. Now T-minus 90 seconds. The Falcon 9 is fully loaded with more than 1 million pounds of kerosene and liquid oxygen. The fully loaded rocket weighs 1.2 million pounds, including its structure and propellant load. At T-minus 60 seconds, the Falcon 9 will enter what's called startup mode. This is when the onboard computers take control of the countdown, overseeing the final 60 seconds of critical steps to prepare for liftoff. T-minus 1 minute. Falcon 9 is confirmed in startup, T-minus 40 seconds. Pressurization of the propellant tanks is underway at this time. T-minus 15. T-minus 10 seconds.
T-minus 15 seconds.
Ignition of the Merlin engines and liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket, climbing away from Launch Pad 39A, lighting up the night sky, carrying 49 more Starlink internet satellites into orbit. Now T plus 23 seconds. Falcon 9 now heading downrange. Now passing T plus 90 seconds, Falcon 9 has surpassed the speed of sound at this time, tracking southeast from Kennedy Space Center. Everything looking good as the rocket climbs into space. This is the third Falcon 9 launch of the year, and it's off to an auspicious start this evening on the way to space with 49 Starlink internet satellites, coming up on T plus 2 minutes into the mission. Coming up on T plus 2 minutes, 15 seconds. In a few moments, we should see MECO, or main engine cutoff, when the 9 Merlin engines will switch off, followed moments later by stage separation and ignition of stage 2. And there is a main engine cutoff, stage separation, and ignition of stage 2. The Merlin vacuum engine beginning its work to continue into orbit, with the 49 Starlink internet satellite stage 1 beginning to arc to the apogee or high point of its trajectory before coming back to Earth for landing on the drone ship, a shortfall of gravitas near the Bahamas. At this point, passing the T plus 3 minute mark, we'll hand over to SpaceX for live views, including onboard camera views of the stage 2 as it climbs into orbit, and stage 1 as it returns to Earth for a landing on the drone ship. Now, passing the T plus 5 minute mark, the second stage's Merlin engine continuing to fire, propelling the Falcon 9 into orbit. Stage 2 with the Starlink satellites now at an altitude of 181 kilometers. Meanwhile, stage 1 now at 119 kilometers and descending, heading back toward the drone ship. Passing the T+6 minute mark in less than a minute, we'll see the entry burn using 3 engines on the first stage booster begin to slow down and guide the first stage toward its landing on the drone ship of shortfall of gravitas. You're looking live at a view of the second stage Merlin engine as it fires into orbit. We saw that entry burn being completed. The Falcon 9 booster now coming back into the atmosphere at 27 kilometers, losing speed as aerodynamic forces slow the rocket down, targeting the drone ship, a shortfall of gravitas around 400 miles southeast of Cape Canaveral. Coming up on T+8 minutes, on the left, you're seeing a view from stage 1 as it makes its final descent to the drone ship on the right. Falcon 9's upper stage about to complete its insertion burn to arrive in orbit. And first stage landing confirmed. Just shy of 9 minutes after launch, the Falcon 9 booster number 1060 has made its return to Earth after its 10th flight to space and back, now safely on the deck of a shortfall of gravitas just northeast of the Bahamas after acing its 10th mission. Meanwhile, stage 2 has shut down and arrived in orbit. Looks like an on-target orbit right now for stage 2. Now 6 minutes from separation of the Starlink satellites. Hello again at T plus 13 minutes. The Falcon 9 rocket, as you probably saw, has arrived in orbit with the 49 Starlink internet satellites on board. However, as expected, the Falcon 9 upper stage has passed outside the range of SpaceX's network of ground stations, currently flying over northern South America, heading on a trajectory that'll take it taking it over Venezuela, then over Brazil, heading out over the Amazon. So this is outside the range of SpaceX's network of ground tracking sites. So the deployment of the Starlink satellites, which is expected at T plus 15 minutes and 32 seconds, will occur during this communications blackout. And SpaceX isn't expected to be able to confirm the successful deployment until the rocket and Starlink satellites fly around the world over the Southern Ocean, and they come back around to the Northern Hemisphere and reach a point over a ground station in Kodiak, Alaska. That's expected around an hour or so from now, give or take a little bit. And at that point, we should hear confirmation from SpaceX that the deployment occurred without a hitch and that everything went well. And then SpaceX will be able to declare success at that point on tonight's mission. You're looking at the live view of the map now as stage 2 continues its arc over South America. The designation label of stage 1 there at the top is the stage 1 landing site, landing location on the drone ship, a short fall of gravitas just northeast of the Bahamas. You saw that landing occur live. A fantastic video, both from an onboard camera on the booster as it made its descent, as well as uninterrupted view from the deck of the drone ship itself, showing the Falcon 9 make its landing. The 10th trip to space and back for this particular booster, number 1060 in SpaceX's fleet. Also, the 103rd intact recovery of a Falcon booster overall since the very first Falcon booster landing back in December of 2015. So we'll end our live commentary at this point. We'll provide updates for you later this evening once we hear confirmation of that spacecraft separation event. This was the third launch of the year from here at Cape Canaveral. 4 more launches scheduled by the end of the month. 3 of those we've confirmed the launch dates for 3 of those. Next up is the launch of a United Launch Alliance Atlas V rocket on Friday, January 21st, 3 days from now. That mission will be at the service of the United States Space Force. It'll be the first ULA Atlas V flight of 2022. And will carry up 2 space surveillance satellites to geostationary orbit. The Atlas V will actually be flying in a unique configuration with a 5-meter class payload fairing and a single solid rocket booster. This version of the Atlas is known as the 511. It'll be the first and only flight of a 511 Atlas V variant in the rocket's storied history. Now less than 30 Atlas Vs left to fly before its retirement. No more 511s on that manifest. So the one and only flight of an Atlas V 511 scheduled for Friday from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, Space Launch Complex 41. Next up, the next confirmed launch we have with a confirmed date is on January 27th, when SpaceX will be back on the range at Cape Canaveral with a Falcon 9 flight from Space Launch Complex 40, carrying the second Cosmos SkyMed second generation satellite, also known as CSG-2. This satellite is a radar surveillance satellite for the Italian Space Agency and the Italian military, carrying out a remote sensing mission with both civilian and military applications. And then the month will wrap up with another launch. We expect it to be a more or less a carbon copy of tonight's launch, when another Falcon 9 mission is set to take off from Pad 39A again with another batch of Starlink internet satellites on January 29th. The other mission listed here is the launch of the Astra Rocket 3 small satellite launch vehicle. That's carrying a package of a few CubeSats for under contract to NASA. NASA's Venture Class Launch Services demonstration mission is slated to fly from Complex 46 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. That mission was originally slated to take off this week. However, launch is no longer expected to occur this week. We haven't heard a new launch date for that mission. This rocket is one of numerous commercial small satellite launch vehicles in the emerging market. And this will be the first flight of Astra's rocket from Cape Canaveral following a series of test flights from Kodiak Island in Alaska, most recently in November when the company achieved orbit for the very first time. So 3 to 4 orbital launches still on tap this month. After 3 to begin the first half of January, 4 more to go. And we'll be here to cover each and every one of them. And we thank you for joining us for our live coverage this evening as you look live again at Pad 39A, an empty launch pad. Everything appeared to go by the book for SpaceX this evening, launching at 9:02 p.m. Eastern Time or 2:02 a.m. UTC after about a 2-hour delay from the mission's first launch opportunity at around 7 p.m. Eastern Time. So stay with us on social media, stay with us on spaceflightnow.com. We'll have updates later this evening on the outcome of the mission, and join us again for coverage of the Atlas V launch on Friday. I'm Stephen Clark, and thank you for joining us.